I can still hear the sound of the zipper on that suitcase. It's strange, the way certain sounds get burned into your memory. Like they hold the weight of everything that unraveled after. That slow drag of the zipper teeth pulling together, locking away folded shirts and carefully packed toiletries. It should have been a comforting sound. It should have meant excitement. A trip ahead. A celebration of 10 years of marriage with the woman I thought was my best friend. Instead, that sound is tangled forever with the moment my life fell apart. It was October of 2021, just a few days before our anniversary. We'd been planning a trip to Charleston, South Carolina, not too far from home in Atlanta, but far enough to feel like an escape, just the two of us walking cobblestone streets, sipping wine by the waterfront, eating shrimp and grits at one of those little restaurants with candlelit tables and soft jazz in the background. That was the vision in my head as I packed, trying to remember if I should bring my brown leather shoes or just stick to sneakers. But I was distracted, and I didn't know why at the time. Her name is Emily. She was my college sweetheart. The girl who laughed at all my dumb jokes back when I thought quoting The Office made me irresistible. We met in 2010 at Georgia State, and from day one, she was this mix of grounded and adventurous. She loved hiking, but she also loved curling up with a glass of Merlot and a good book. She wasn't flashy, didn't chase after attention, and that's what made her stand out. At least, that's what I used to think. 10 years into marriage, we had the typical routine jobs, bills, the occasional night out with friends. I worked in IT, bouncing between fixing servers that always seemed to crash at the worst possible moments, and explaining to people for the 1,000th time that turning something off and back on could actually solve their problem. Emily worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized firm in Buckhead. She was good at it too. She had this way of making people feel like their ideas were important, even when she subtly shifted things to be her own. I always admired that. But over the past year, something had been different. At first, I chalked it up to the pandemic. We were all drained, weren't we? Everyone was tired of working from home, of staring at the same walls, of scrolling through bad news until their eyes glazed over. She had started going back to the office a few days a week while I stayed remote, and I convinced myself that explained the distance I felt. When she came home late, saying she had one more meeting, I believed her. When she seemed glued to her phone, I told myself it was just work stress. That's what you do when you don't want to see the truth. You explain it away. That night, while I was packing, she was in the shower. I remember the steam slipping out from the crack in the bathroom door, the faint smell of her lavender shampoo mixing with the scent of laundry detergent from the clean clothes I'd folded. My phone had died earlier, so I reached for hers to check the time. That was the moment. That was when everything started to change. But let me not get ahead of myself. Before I talk about what I saw, I need to paint the picture of who I was in that moment. Because looking back, I wasn't just a husband, I was a man desperate to believe in something that wasn't real anymore. I thought our marriage was solid. We had arguments like anyone else, mostly about stupid things. Whether I left dishes in the sink too long, or whether she spent too much on throw pillows we didn't need. But we always made up. Or at least I thought we did. I thought love meant forgiving, overlooking, trusting. I thought love meant giving her the benefit of the doubt, every single time. It's almost embarrassing now, the little moments that should have made me pause. The nights she turned her phone face down on the table during dinner. The sudden gym membership she signed up for in January 2021. Saying she wanted to feel healthier after the lockdown wait. The way she started buying new clothes. Little black dresses she said were for client dinners. And the worst part is, I noticed, but I pushed it into a box in my mind and slammed the lid shut. Because opening it meant acknowledging that maybe I wasn't enough for her anymore. There's something about anniversaries that makes you reflective though. 10 years felt like a milestone. Something worth looking back on. I found myself remembering our wedding in Savannah, how humid it had been that day. The way my suit clung to my back as I waited for her to walk down the aisle. I remembered the trip we took to London in 2015, wandering through Hyde Park on a grey morning, laughing when the rain soaked us through and we had to duck into a pub to dry off. I remembered the night we adopted Daisy, our golden retriever, and how Emily had cried when the puppy curled up in her lap on the ride home. All those memories swirled around as I tucked clothes into the suitcase, carefully folding them like it mattered, like the trip was going to fix the cracks I didn't want to admit were there. And then in that one simple moment of grabbing her phone, I felt the first jolt of something breaking. I didn't mean to snoop. I really didn't. I just tapped the screen to check the time. But when it lit up, there it was. A preview of a text message, a name I didn't recognize, a message that made my stomach drop through the floor. I froze, staring at it, hearing the shower still running in the background. I told myself I must have misread it, that it couldn't mean what I thought it meant. I tried to swallow the rising panic, to breathe through it, but my hands started to shake. And in that moment, with her phone glowing in my hand and the suitcase half packed on the bed, I realized that maybe everything I thought I knew about my life was about to unravel. It's funny, isn't it, how quickly your reality can shift. One minute you're planning outfits for a romantic trip, and the next you're standing on the edge of a cliff you didn't even know existed. That's where I was, teetering, staring down at something dark and endless, not yet ready to fall, but knowing I couldn't stay balanced forever. Looking back now, I almost wish I'd put the phone down. I almost wish I'd walked away, zipped up the suitcase, and stayed blissfully ignorant for a little longer. But that's not how life works. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it, and I was about to see more than I ever wanted to. The shower water kept running, and for a few seconds I just stood there staring at that glowing screen like it was some kind of bomb, counting down. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought she'd hear it over the sound of the water. The message on the screen was simple. Too simple. And that's what made it devastating. It wasn't even dressed up in code words. Just can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. I keep thinking about it. The name above it. Mark. The name felt foreign in my mouth. Like gravel. I didn't know a Mark in her circle of friends. Not at work. Not among the people we saw on weekends, and that's what made it worse. He wasn't someone familiar, someone I could piece together and ration. He was a ghost, an outsider who had somehow stepped inside the walls of my life without me knowing. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, smash it against the wall, but instead I unlocked it. My hands moved before my mind did, sliding up, opening the texts were all there, scrolling back for weeks, maybe months. Flirty messages, good morning and good night texts, plans to meet at hotels, lies spun so casually I couldn't believe I had fallen for them. Working late tonight, stuck in another meet, traffic's terrible, I'll be home later. Every excuse was laid bare in those messages, and suddenly the timeline of my last year rewrote itself in front of me. The late nights, the gym trips, the new dresses, it all clicked together in a way that made me nauseous. There was one photo too, nothing explicit, but intimate enough that I wanted to claw my eyes out. A picture of her smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. A smile I thought had disappeared because of stress, because of exhaustion, but no, she had given it to someone else. I could feel the room spinning. My mouth went dry, my palms sweaty, like I'd been punched in the gut. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of trust, 10 years of building a life together. And here I was, realizing it might have all been a lie. I heard the shower shut off, the squeak of the faucet turning. My stomach lurched. I didn't know what to do. Confront her, pretend I hadn't seen anything, hide the phone and stew in silence. My instincts were at war with each other. Part of me wanted to scream the second she walked out, to demand answers, to rip the mask off her face, and force her to admit it. Another part of me wanted to curl into a ball, to deny it, to wait until after the trip because I couldn't bear the thought of watching everything shatter right now. She came out of the bathroom a minute later, wrapped in a towel, steam curling around her like a ghostly aura. She smiled at me. At least, she tried to. A tired smile, not the kind that lit up her whole face like when we first met. She said something about how she needed to pack her new dress, the one she'd bought at Nordstrom last week. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I placed her phone back exactly where it had been, face down on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I zipped the suitcase closed. I told myself not yet, don't do it yet. That night I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her steady breathing beside me. Every time she shifted in bed, my chest I kept replaying the texts in my head, the way she'd written to him like a schoolgirl with a crush, giddy and alive in a way she hadn't been with me in years. I wondered if she ever thought of me when she was with him, if she lied to him the same way she lied to. The betrayal was sharp and raw, like an open wound I couldn't stop touching. The next morning, I went through the motions. I made coffee, toasted bagels, fed Daisy, all while Emily hummed in the kitchen, tapping out texts on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to snatch it out of her hand, to see if she was messaging him right then. Instead, I forced a smile, burned the roof of my mouth with hot coffee, and tried to act normal. But inside, something had cracked. We drove down to Charleston the following day, 4 hours in the car together, her scrolling on her phone, me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I don't remember what we talked about. I don't even remember if we talked at all. My mind was consumed by images of her and him, replaying the texts like a loop I couldn't escape. When we pulled into the historic district, I should have been excited. The streets were lined with colorful row houses. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine, and horse-drawn carriages clicked by as tourists snapped photos, but all of it felt muted, like I was watching life through a fogged-up window. We checked into our hotel, a charming little place near King Street, with exposed brick walls and a view of the rooftops. She was giddy about the room, pointing out the vintage furniture, the clawfoot tub. I nodded, my insides churned. That night, we went to dinner at a restaurant I had booked weeks in advance. Candlelight flickered on our table, soft jazz floated through the air, and plates of oysters and seared scallops arrived, perfectly plated. She raised a glass of wine to toast to 10 years, and I clinked mine against hers, the sound hollow in my ears. I looked at her across the table, and felt like I didn't know who she was anymore. I wanted to confront her right there, in the middle of that restaurant. I wanted to lean across the table, and ask her how long she'd been sleeping with him, if she thought of him while sitting here pretending to love me. But I didn't. I sat there smiling through clenched teeth, pretending to savor the food while my stomach twisted into. Back in the hotel room, she slipped into that new black dress she'd been so excited about, spinning in front of the mirror, asking me how she looked. I told her she looked beautiful, and she did. God help me, she did. And that made it worse, because I couldn't reconcile the woman I married with the woman who had been writing those messages. That night, as she slept beside me in the big hotel bed, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up her phone again. More messages, more plans. He wanted to see her the night we got back from Charleston. He told her he missed her body, missed the way she laughed. She sent back a heart emoji. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen burning into my eyes, and felt my world tilt. That was the breaking point. I couldn't deny it anymore. Couldn't bury it under excuses. She wasn't just slipping away from me, she was gone. I remember slipping into the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor with her phone in my hand, trying to breathe. I thought about smashing it, throwing it in the toilet, doing anything to erase what I'd seen, but the truth was already inside me. There was no undoing it. I don't know how long I sat there. My legs went numb, my back ached, but I couldn't. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, all the memories, the trips, the late night talks, the plans for the future. I thought about how I'd saved up for months to surprise her with this anniversary trip, thinking it would bring us close, and all along she'd been slipping away into someone else's arms. When I finally crawled back into bed, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep up the act, wondering if she even cared enough to notice that something in me had died that night. And I think that was the cruelest part. She didn't notice, not the next morning when we walked hand in hand through the Charleston market, not when we ate fried green tomatoes at a little cafe, not when she laughed at a street performer juggling fire. She smiled and kissed me, and played the part, and I realized she had probably been doing that for months. By the time we drove home, the silence between us was deafening. She chatted on the phone with a friend for half the ride, laughing at some story, while I stared at the road, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I knew then that everything had changed. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't unknow. And the worst part was, I still didn't know what I was going to do about it. The drive back to Atlanta felt like the longest 4 hours of my life. I kept my eyes locked on the road, pretending to concentrate on traffic, but really I was just trying not to fall apart behind the wheel. Emily scrolled through her phone for most of the trip, smiling to herself every now and then, and each time I caught that little curve of her lips out of the corner of my eye, it was like a knife twisting deeper. I couldn't help but wonder, was she reading his messages right there next to me, while I sat silent in the driver's seat? When we finally pulled into our driveway, Daisy bounded toward us like she hadn't seen us in years, tail wagging, tongue hanging out. I bent down to scratch behind her ears, burying my face in her fur, trying to draw comfort from the unconditional love of a dog. She smelled like grass and home, and for a second I almost broke down right there in the entryway. The next few days blurred together. I went through the motions, logging into work, sitting through Zoom calls, answering emails, but inside I was unraveling. Every time Emily left the house for meetings, my mind spiraled. Was she really at the office, or was she slipping into his arms, laughing the way she used to laugh with me? Nights were the worst. Lying in bed next to her felt like torture. I could hear the faint buzz of her phone on the nightstand, the way she'd shift and check it, turning her body away from me. I pretended to sleep, my eyes squeezed shut, but inside my chest it felt like a war zone. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and found her gone. Panic jolted me upright. I crept out into the living room and there she was, sitting on the couch with her phone glowing in her hands, smiling down at the screen. She didn't notice me standing in the hallway. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, but eventually she got up, padded back to bed and slipped under the covers as if nothing had happened. I lay there staring at the ceiling until dawn, my heart hollowed out. I started drinking more than I should. At first it was just a beer after work, then a couple, but by the second week after our trip, I was pouring whiskey into my coffee mug just to get through the day. I told myself it was just to take the edge off, but really I was trying to drown the voice in my head that kept replaying those texts, those photos, those little smiles she gave her phone. Work noticed. My manager, a guy named Craig, pulled me aside during a meeting and asked if I was okay. He said I seemed distracted, like my head wasn't in the game. I lied, told him I was just tired, that things at home were fine. He gave me that look people give when they don't believe you but don't want to pry, and he let it go. Friends noticed. My buddy Tom invited us out for dinner one Saturday, but I made up an excuse. I couldn't stomach sitting across from Emily, pretending everything was fine in front of people who had known us since college. I couldn't risk seeing her slip up, or worse, seeing her act perfectly normal, because both possibilities were unbearable. Even my mom noticed when I called her one evening. She asked why my voice sounded heavy, why I hadn't been by for Sunday dinner in a while. I wanted to tell her everything, to spill it all out and hear her say it wasn't my fault, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to shatter the image she had of Emily, the daughter-in-law she adored. I felt trapped in my own house, in my own life, in my own silence. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt in the moment, it infects everything. It seeps into the way you look at yourself, the way you remember your past, the way you imagine your future. I started questioning everything. Was she ever really happy with me? Were those trips we took, those nights we laughed until our stomachs hurt, were they real or was she faking it? Even back then. And then came the darker thoughts. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I hadn't been enough. I replayed all the times I'd been too tired to talk after work, all the nights I'd chosen video games over going out, all the times I'd brushed off her complaints about feeling unseen. Maybe she'd turned to him because I'd failed her. That thought chewed at me day and night, even when I knew deep down that cheating is a choice, not an accident. 2 weeks after the trip, I hit rock bottom. I came home early from work one Thursday, and found her car already in the driveway. My stomach dropped. She wasn't supposed to be home yet. I walked inside and the house was quiet, too quiet. Daisy wasn't even in the living room, which meant she'd been put in the backyard. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and that's when I heard it. A laugh. Her laugh, the one I hadn't heard in months. Bright and full of light. It came from our bedroom. I don't remember making the decision to open the door. My hand just turned the knob, and there they were. Emily, and him, Mark. It was like my worst nightmare brought to life. My own bed, our sheets twisted around them, her hair spilling across the pillow I had bought her last Christmas, his shirt on the floor, his shoes by the dresser, the room tilted. I couldn't breathe, my chest seized up like someone had crushed me under a. She gasped when she saw me, scrambled to cover herself, words tumbling out that I didn't even process. He sat up, eyes wide, muttering something about leaving, about not meaning for this to happen. I didn't move, I just stood there staring, my whole world collapsing in slow motion. I think I laughed. God help me. I think I actually laughed, because it was so absurd, so surreal to see the woman I'd shared 10 years of my life with, wrapped up with someone else in the bed we'd built our life around. The laugh came out broken,
jagged, more like a sob, and then I walked out. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't even slam the door. I just walked out. I drove aimlessly for hours that night. No destination in mind. At some point I ended up in a Waffle House off I-28-5. Sitting in a booth with a plate of cold hash browns in front of. The waitress asked if I was okay. And I lied again. Said I was fine, but I wasn't fine. I was shattered. When I finally went home, he was gone. Emily was sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears, begging me to talk to her. I walked past her straight into the guest bedroom and shut the door. I lay there in the dark, Daisy curled up beside me, her warm body pressed against mine, like she knew I needed comfort. I cried into her fur until I couldn't cry anymore. The next morning, Emily tried to talk. She said it had been a mistake, that she didn't know what she was thinking, that she still loved me, but the words rang hollow. I'd seen the texts, the photos, the laughter in the middle of the night. I'd seen her with him, and there was no unseeing. I told her I needed space, and for the next week I lived like a ghost in my own house. We barely spoke. I moved into the guest room permanently. At work I was a wreck. I missed deadlines, snapped at coworkers, zoned out during meetings. Craig pulled me aside again, and this time I almost told him, but I didn't. I couldn't let the shame out into the world yet. Nights were the hardest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. I replayed it like a movie, torturing myself with the detail. And each time, I wondered, was this the first time in our bed? Or had there been others I hadn't caught? My mental health spiraled. I stopped eating, lost 10 pounds in a month. Friends texted, asking if I wanted to grab a drink or catch a game, but I ignored them. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want anyone to see how broken I was. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. My hair started falling out more than usual, clumps in the shower drain. My skin broke out like I was a teenager again. Even Daisy seemed more anxious, pacing the house, whining at closed doors, sensing the tension. One night, lying in that guest bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. Either I confronted her fully and demanded the truth, or I packed a bag and left for good. I didn't know which yet, but I knew the man I had been before, optimistic, trusting, content, was gone. In his place was someone raw, someone angry, someone desperate for answers, and I knew this was only the beginning.
The night I found them in our bed marked the death of one version of me. But what followed in the weeks after was the birth of someone else. Someone harder, sharper, and unwilling to keep living in the ruins of a lie. For the first couple of weeks, I was paralyzed. I floated through life like a ghost, numb during the day, restless at night. But something shifted one morning when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face was gaunt, my eyes bloodshot, my beard scruffy like I'd stopped caring. I didn't recognize myself. I thought about my dad, how, after my parents' divorce when I was 12, he'd sunk into himself, lost his job, started drinking until there was nothing left of the man I remembered. I saw him in my own reflection that morning, and the thought terrified me. I wasn't going to become him. So I started with small steps. I quit drinking cold turkey, poured the whiskey down the drain even though my hands shook as I did it. I rejoined the gym I hadn't set foot in since 2019 when I'd sprained my knee playing pickup basketball. The first day back was brutal. I could barely run a mile without gasping for air, but every drop of sweat felt like purging some of the poison she'd left in me. But exercise wasn't enough. I needed something more. I needed truth. Emily kept circling me during those weeks, hovering in doorways, trying to start conversation. Sometimes she cried. Other times she got defensive, lashing out like I was the one who'd betrayed her. I listened in silence, my jaw tight, filing it all away. She said she'd ended things with Mark, that it had been a mistake and that she was willing to go to therapy, to do whatever it took. But every word felt rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script. I didn't believe her, and I didn't want to live in the fog of half-truths anymore. That's when I started digging. I wasn't proud of it, but I became obsessed. I went through phone bills, bank statements, credit card charges. I found hotel bookings she'd never told me about, dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, charges for lingerie I'd never seen her wear. Each discovery was like another crack in the foundation. But strangely it also gave me strength. Knowledge was power, and I was done being in the dark. One night, after she went to bed, I reached out to a buddy from college, Marcus, who worked in cybersecurity. I didn't give him all the details, just said I suspected Emily was hiding something, and asked if he could help me recover deleted messages from an old backup of her phone. He hesitated at first, told me it was probably a bad idea, but eventually he agreed. A week later he sent me a file. Reading through those messages was like ripping off a scab and pouring salt into the wound. There were texts going back almost a year. Plans, declarations, even I love yous. She hadn't just been sleeping with Mark. She'd been building a second life with him. And here's the part that made my blood run cold. In one message from March, she told him she was thinking about leaving me. She wrote that she couldn't imagine another 10 years like this, and that Mark made her feel alive again. She said she was scared but also excited. That was 6 months before our anniversary trip. 6 months before she let me book a hotel, plan dinners, hold her hand on the streets of Charleston, while she sent him heart emojis behind my back. Something snapped in me then. The grief hardened into if she was going to play me for a fool, if she was going to build a fantasy life with this man while keeping me as her safety net, then she didn't deserve my silence. She didn't deserve the easy way out. I started planning. It wasn't about revenge, at least, not at first. It was about clarity. I needed her to see what she had done, to face it fully without the shield of her excuses. So I began collecting everything. Screenshots of messages, copies of hotel receipts, even a photo of the two of them together that I found buried in her cloud back. It felt like assembling a case, like I was preparing for trial. In the meantime, I started pulling away from her in ways she couldn't ignore. I stopped eating dinner with her, stopped responding to her texts during the day. I moved all my clothes into the guest room closet, leaving our bedroom half empty, a silent statement of what she'd destroyed. When she asked what was going on, I told her I was figuring things out. But inside I already knew. I wasn't staying. The only question left was how I was going to leave, and whether I wanted to burn the bridge completely on my way out. The answer came one evening when Emily said she wanted us to go to dinner with her parents. She thought it would be good for appearances. Her exact words. That was when I realized, she wasn't sorry. Not really. She just didn't want the fallout. She wanted to control the story, to keep her image intact while I carried the weight of her betrayal. That's when the idea hit me. If she cared so much about appearances, then maybe the only way to make her face the truth was to strip that mask away. I don't know if it was petty. Maybe it was. But I reached out to Mark. I found his profile on LinkedIn. Clean-cut guy in his late 30s, a project manager at some construction firm. He looked ordinary. The kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second thought. I sent him a message. We need to He didn't respond at first, but a few days later he agreed to meet. We sat across from each other at a Starbucks near Midtown, and I could see the discomfort all over his face. He didn't look like a villain, just a man who'd made a choice and now had to face it. I told him I knew everything. I laid out the receipts, the messages, the hotel bookings. His face paled. He muttered something about how he thought Emily was going to leave me, how he hadn't meant for it to go this far. I laughed, bitter and sharp. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. And then I said the thing that made him squirm the most. You're not the only one she's lied to. Because that was the truth. She'd been lying to both of us. She'd told him she was going to leave me, told me she was committed to our marriage, all while playing both sides to keep her options open. Seeing the realization hit him was strangely satisfying. For once I wasn't the only fool in the room. After that meeting, I felt I wasn't the weak, broken man in the guest bedroom anymore. I had knowledge, leverage, power, and I was going to use it. The final act came 2 weeks later, at her parents' house. She'd insisted we go, said it would help smooth things over. I agreed, but only because I had a plan. We sat around the dinner table, her parents smiling, asking about work, about the trip to Charleston. Emily smiled back, pretending everything was fine, like we were the picture-perfect couple. And that's when I pulled out the folder. Inside were the screenshots, the receipts, the photos. I laid them on the table, one by one, Like cards in a game I was finally ready to win. Her parents' faces went pale. Emily's hands shook as she tried to grab the papers, stammering about privacy and overreact. But the truth was there, undeniable. And for the first time she couldn't spin it away. Her father looked at me, eyes full of pity. Her mother looked at her, eyes full of disappointment. And Emily looked at me with something I can only describe as rage. Rage that I had taken control of the story, that I hadn't let her dictate how this would go. That night I packed a bag and left. I got a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a view of the city skyline. Daisy came with me, of course. She lay at the foot of the bed that first night, her warm body pressed against mine, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking up in panic. It wasn't easy after that. Divorce papers followed, long conversations with lawyers, splitting assets, fighting over little things that felt monumental in the moment. But through it all, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I wasn't living in the fog anymore. I wasn't gaslighting myself into believing things were fine. And slowly I started to rebuild. The day the divorce was finalized, I woke up early, before the sun even kissed the city skyline. I made coffee in my small apartment kitchen, the steam curling up from the mug like a quiet exhale. Daisy lay at my feet, her eyes heavy but loyal, her presence grounding me. I held the mug in my hands and stared out the window at the streets below, the cars rushing by, people heading somewhere, anywhere, oblivious to the wreckage of my life. It was over, the legal part at least. Emily's name wouldn't appear on my lease anymore. Our accounts were split and the weight of the secrets she had carried, and that I had discovered, was finally off my chest. But there was a different weight I hadn't anticipated. The weight of memory, of grief, of the years lost to someone who wasn't who I thought she was. For a while I questioned everything. How do you move on when the person you trusted the most becomes a stranger overnight? How do you reconcile the woman you loved with the woman who betrayed you? I walked through the city streets, sometimes at night when the sidewalks were empty, and I let myself think about her. Not angrily, not with hate, but with the hollow ache of someone who had been deceived. It took months before I felt like myself again. I focused on work, on friends who hadn't given up on me, on myself. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college, scribbling in a notebook with a pen that clicked as I wrote. I wrote everything, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the relief, the rage. Each word was a small step back to who I used to be, before Emily's lies infiltrated every corner of my life. One rainy afternoon in March 2022, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. The city smelled of wet asphalt and blooming azaleas, a mix of melancholy and hope. I watched her run ahead, chasing a squirrel, completely absorbed in her own little world. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled without guilt. I realized I could love again, not her but life, myself even. That realization hit like a jolt of electricity. The irony of it all didn't escape me. The woman who had stolen 10 years from me had, in a way, forced me to reclaim them for myself. She had pushed me to a breaking point. Yes, but on the other side of that pain, I discovered resilience I didn't know I had. I was no longer the man cowering in the guest bedroom, drowning in whiskey, spiraling into I was someone who had faced betrayal, who had stared it in the face and survived. I started dating again slowly, cautiously, like testing the waters after a storm. At first it was awkward. I didn't know how to trust anyone, how to let someone see me without armor. But then I met Rachel. She's a graphic designer I met at a cafe in Midtown, sketching in a notebook much like I used to. She's kind, patient, and doesn't pretend to be anyone she's not. There's a warmth in her presence that doesn't demand performance. And I found myself laughing again. A real laugh, not the hollow one I used to force in front of Emily's texts. We started with coffee, moved to walks around the Beltline, then dinners where conversation flowed effortless. She knew about Emily, not all the details but enough to understand why I was guarded, why I carried a careful shield around my heart. She didn't judge me, she didn't rush me, she simply let me be, and that was revolution. Even with Rachel, there are moments when I catch myself flinching at a text notification, or replaying old memories of Emily that shouldn't matter anymore. But I've learned to acknowledge them, then let them. I've learned that healing isn't linear, and scars aren't weaknesses, they're evidence of survival. I think about Emily sometimes, not every day but often enough to feel a sense of closure rather than anger. I don't want to see her,
And I don't want to be with her. But I remember her laughter, the trips we took, the way she could curl up with me on a rainy afternoon. And I recognize it as a part of my life that shaped me. A dark chapter, yes, but one that led me here to resilience, to clarity, to freedom. There's a strange sense of gratitude in that. Not for the betrayal itself, of course, but for the lessons it forced me to learn, for the strength I didn't know I had, for the boundaries I've learned to set, the self-respect I've reclaimed, and the life I've started to rebuild, brick by brick. A year after the divorce, I moved into a slightly bigger apartment, still downtown, still modest, but with more sunlight, more space for Daisy to run, and a little studio corner where I can write without distraction. I keep a photo on my desk of Piedmont Park on that rainy March afternoon. Daisy running through puddles, the city skyline in the background. It's a reminder that even after a storm, life goes on, and sometimes it's beautiful again. Emily eventually remarried. I found out through mutual friends, though I don't think I really wanted to know. It didn't sting like I thought it would. Instead, it felt like a final severing of old ties. A confirmation that the chapter was truly closed. I didn't wish her ill. I simply wished her honesty, something she hadn't given me for 10 long years. I realized that closure isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about reclaiming your own life. It's about stepping out of the shadows of someone else's choices, and deciding that your story is yours alone. And that's what I did. I stepped into my own story. Now, as I sit here with Daisy curled up beside me, the city alive outside my window, Rachel laughing softly as she sketches in the living room, I can finally breathe without guilt, without fear, without the weight of someone else's betrayal crushing me. I am whole, I am awake, I am free, and I finally understand. The end of one life isn't always the end of happiness. Sometimes it's the beginning of everything you were too afraid to seek. Because the truth is, heartbreak leaves scars, but it also leaves lessons. And if you survive, if you rise from it, you emerge stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever before. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of trust broken, a betrayal that could have destroyed me but it didn't. I'm here, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I own the world again.